Oi, what's the best game where you get to eat pie? What's the best game where you play a dead guy? Aye, you'll find out in VG247's podcast. Here, what's the best game where you swing from a rope? And what's the best game where you batter the Pope? Assassin's Creed 2. Like I said, you will find out in this your podcast. Hello and welcome to VG247's Best Games Ever podcast, where we attempt to find the best game within a very specific category. For example, this week we're looking for the best driving, not racing game. Really specific. Some of the best games ever made are just about cutting about in a motor vehicle without any sort of competitive element. Euro Truck Simulator, for example, outside of the fact that it's ostensibly about managing a haulage company, it's actually about just driving massive trucks along pleasant routes in Europe, seeing the sights, driving to places you've been on holiday and going, I've been there, and oh yeah, they actually did put that bridge in, etc. Speaking of things that are lethargic and vaguely underwhelming while having an unfathomably devoted fan base, I'm joined today by Tom Ori. We're also joined today by regular Sharif Saeed. And for the first time on this podcast, he's a presenter, he's a writer, he's a Dungeons and Dragons aficionado, he's even a racing driver in his spare time, so he's eminently qualified to talk about this. It's Mike Channel from Outside Xbox and some other things. How you doing, Mike?
I'm good, thanks. I'm glad we finally got the financial arrangements sorted out so I could appear in this podcast.
Just wiring you £30,000 from the VG247 budget. I'm sorry, Saeed, we have to let you go. But it's really nice to have you on. We previously worked together on a little thing called Top Gear Gaming that nobody watched.
We did.
So
I watched it.
Yeah, yeah. Sharif watched it. Yeah, you're the one guy.
I watched it on Facebook. I think it was.
Yeah, you had to.
I thought it was a really cool idea. Honestly,
poorly executed. Is that what you said?
No.
It was great in concept. It's just extremely poorly executed.
No, I just at that point in time, I was like, Top Gear was top of the mind, and this idea of like, oh, we're doing a thing that's for a quote unquote younger audience was like, oh, this appeals to me. I like this, and then it disappeared off the face of the earth. And then years later, I have somehow. Worked with Jim Trinka, and it's weird.
These are very kind words. Thank
you. He worked with Jim Trinka. That was the takeaway Mike had from it.
Well, I've not worked with Mike. I've been a fan from a distance, but I've not met him. I'm not.
Yeah.
Why are being so nice?
Why being 10 meters or?
Why is this just niceness, Jim? You introduced it. I'm like sluggish. I don't know what else it was. Something horrendous and mean. And then Mike was just like all his lifetime achievements back to back. He's so wonderful. Did you just make this topic just for Mike?
This is because Mike's a really talented broadcaster and a very busy man, and him being here.
I've been broadcasting for 20 years, Jim.
Right. All right. Okay.
Lots of dedicated fans.
Yeah, the one Welsh guy who keeps shouting at me every time you don't win. That's your most dedicated.
5 of them
fan.
Being played by James Batchelor. Just different characters and different voices.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So the topic is the best driving game, not racing game. That's a very important distinction because a lot of people don't understand that distinction. Do you agree, Mike?
I do, yeah, I do. There are definitely driving games and racing games. And when we got onto my own chosen choice, you'll discover that I've picked the platonic ideal of a driving, not racing game.
Yeah.
I basically zeroed in, laser guided, picked the correct answer, which means that everyone else's answers are, by definition, wrong.
Very well. That's
the panel will decide.
Yeah. I'm going to decide.
The panel being Jim Trinka.
Yeah, exactly. I've been given given all the power here by Tom Ori, which he regrets every week. Okay, first of all, let's hear from Sharif because you haven't been on for a few weeks. So So I've been missing you, Sharif. So
me too. Yeah. I've been missing the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. So you started at the beginning saying driving games, Euro Truck Simulator, and all that stuff that immediately comes to mind when you're thinking, oh, we're driving. I think that's a fair way to look at it. And I think you could also lump in games like Mud Runner into it. Although, absolutely. In fairness, they're more kind of like puzzle games where you have a car as a tool. So not quite applicable. But when I think of this, or when I was thinking of an answer to this, I wanted something to have the spirit of racing, which is like the fast-paced action, the excitement of racing, but without actually racing. Which, just to be clear, and I don't like to get pedantic, even though I want an episode entirely by being grammatically correct. I want to be clear that racing is, you want to be as high up the field when that checker flag goes up as possible, right? You want to shave seconds off your time. You're either racing a ghost, so it's basically all about time and placement. It doesn't matter what else you do. So nothing around it matters. If you're number one, it's better than being number two. That's all there is to it, right? No matter how you dress it or but my pick is a game where you're driving fast and you're in the spirit of the racing and having all the action around you, but you're not racing. And I'll explain why. So my pick is Onrush, which is a game from the Evolution Studios. Technically not under the name Evolution Studios, because when Sony realized they're just too interesting for their portfolio, they sacked them. And so immediately afterwards, they joined Codemasters, which is obviously the premier name of UK racing, and pitched this new IP. So Onrush is, what if a Call of Duty match was on wheels? It's not a racing game. You are in a car, right? You are driving at really fast speeds. In fact, it has maybe some of the best sense of speed in any video game that I have ever played. But what if it's, instead of Call of Duty has, King of the Hill style modes, headquarters, these things. What if that was the objective? And so every single mode in that game was a team points-based thing that resembles something from an arcade shooter. Where it's we're trying to all get into this circle, and as the longer you stay in this moving field, the more points you generate for your team. And on top of that, you have the element of action to it, which is ramming cars. There was a mechanic where I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically, if you line up your jump just enough with another player and crush them from above, that was a thing that you could do. You could just do flips off ramps to kick people off the track. So it had an element of burnout to it, and some really, really cool destruction physics and destruction models on cars. And I love that it was almost too original for its own good. It never made it to PC. Yeah, which is a real shame. They shut online servers I think about a year ago now, which is funny that we're talking about this now. You can still play it offline, but basically every single mode, they had the mode where it's what if you hit these very tight gates? So everyone is fighting to hit these tight gates and knocking each other off the track. It's what if you were to I talked about the moving field before, and it's what if we were to instead hunt down other players, and they had this really sort of cool comeback mechanic where the worse you did, the better cars you got. And so everything was just respawn based. It's again, like a Call of Duty match.
This sounds incredible.
It is incredible, and it was incredible, and it had some really impressive tech, ran at 60 FPS on the rickety old PS4 and Xbox One. I own it on both platforms because I loved it so much.
I can't believe this.
And so, unfortunately, didn't do well for them. It had the some of the things around the experience. It had some issues at launch, and the menus looked like Overwatch menus, which is, if you're listening or watching this, you'll know exactly what I mean. Really superfluous, here is a hat for your dude, and it's you sure, okay, man. They wanted an element of live service to it, but it wasn't poorly monetized. It was, to my recollection, it was all entirely free. There wasn't some insidious try to pay us money for this, but go look at gameplay of that game and tell me you don't watch that and get excited about doing this. And they had if you're a little bit of a nerd, there's a Digital Foundry video where they talk to the team about the engine and how they managed to get 60 FPS and procedural destruction on these cards. It's such a shame that game just never.
I mean, you're really selling it to me. I played this game Res the year it was slated to come out. Mm-hmm. And sat down, and it was just whatever vertical slice they had us playing was just it just felt like a little bit like Destruction Derby, maybe. But
did you think the driving part of it was bad? the driving part in
I
particular.
don't remember being particularly blown away by it, but I wonder if it was just not that great a demo, because what they should have just had you standing there telling people, this sounds incredible. I really want to play this
describing
now.
a really great competitive game, but not a really great driving game. Sounds
But
like
what
it's
if it was
about
also?
competition and challenging combat, but then the driving, I didn't really get a sense of driving being the
racing
key.
is about competition. It's the entire point of racing. It's competing with other people.
But this is about driving. This is driving, not racing, or combat. There's no combat in the title of this podcast, Sharif.
I mean, you don't have a gun. You just snuck people off the track instead of them being all the way down the field and cursing you. It's you respawn and come back and just do the same thing to them, because
I drove to Nottingham at the weekend.
Was Onrush
in a tiny shitty city car, right? And it was incredible. Basically, a hairdryer doesn't even have a turbocharger on it, and I loved every second. I loved every second of fleeing up the motorway in that.
You're all about that naturally
hairdryer.
aspirated life, aren't you?
That's a great like a sticker on the back of it. It's like, instead of like having my other car is whatever, it's like I'm all about that natural.
I've got to be honest about Onrush. I didn't like it at all. I thought it was rubbish.
That's
sorry.
a shame. No, that's fine.
I think the problem I had with that game is it didn't have any kind of like rhythm to it, or like there were no highs and lows. It was just like constantly at 11, and that's super exciting at the start. But then after a while, you're just like, but where do you go from here? And what I would describe it as like, and Sharif, you can tell me if this is an inaccurate portrayal, but in a cartoon where like two things are fighting and it's just a freaking cloud of like smoke with arms and legs coming out. Right. It was that, but with like wheels and stuff coming out, and that just traveled around the circuit. And it's not like it didn't have laps. That was one of the things they were like, our racing game doesn't have laps or a finish line. And I'm like, well, I like those things because there's a sense of like victory and triumph when you cross them.
You're standing there in your actual racing gear, like, wow, you're not selling it to
with
me.
The helmet on and the gloves. Yeah. So this cloud of cartoon smoke with cars whizzes around the circuit for like a while until attritionally one team gets slightly more points than the other because the other one's respawned too many times, and then the match ends. And I was like, this doesn't do it for me at all. Like I need ups and downs. I need like highs and lows, triumphs and tragedies, right? Not too many tragedies in a racing game. We don't want to see heads come off or anything. But I didn't like Onrush very much.
Keep it light, Mike.
It was fun, but
I think it, from a distance, it definitely looks exhausting. If you're like, it's definitely like a good mental image is like the smoke coming out of people just fighting, and you're not really sure what's happening, but like there's some action going on in there. I think it can be. I will say the different modes have different levels of escalation, but it is constantly at 11. And as much as I love it, I can't, like, my sessions with it were brief compared to my session was like a Forza or like a normal racing game because of that, like, because you're constantly have to be like on effectively. But it's fine. Like, I do the same thing for a Call of Duty. I do the same thing with Overwatch because those games like are competitive games and I'm inherently competitive. So I always go,
I do think if you come at it from the sense that you talked about, where it's like, well, this is an automotive game, but in the vein of a Call of Duty match, I think it starts to make a bit more sense then.
Call of Duty is known for its driving, isn't it?
Right. Okay. All right, Tom. Let's move on. Tom, what is your pick for the best driving game, not racing game?
Well, I was going to pick Euro Truck Simulator 2.
Are you holding for applause? Like, what are you...
In the intro, right?
I didn't ruin that.
So you ruined it. You mentioned
Euro Truck Simulator 2 if you want.
But the point, I was going to pick that because I couldn't think of anything else. Haven't even played it, really, outside of, like, I put it on my Steam Deck for about 5 minutes.
Okay.
So I haven't picked that because I thought it would come out like I haven't played it and I'd lose, right? So
it will come out.
Someone would reveal it.
Will be ruined.
Like Steam our account 5 minutes or something. But this goes back to, this is quite an old game now. It's linked to my mind to this sort of road trip. Road trip is not really the right term. It was like we just got a car, me and my wife, because we'd lived in a city for a while. And you don't need cars in cities. You just public transport, walk around, etc. We just got a car, so we just used to drive around and go to places we couldn't go before when we moved out the city. And we were driving along. This is somewhat relevant before people jump in. We were driving along and we wanted to get some lunch, so we pulled into the supermarket of some kind, right? Supermarket, I can't remember what it was. We just pulled into the supermarket. I went in, my wife stayed in the car, just going to pop in and get some sandwiches or something. Walked into the supermarket, and the layout was a bit odd. Like right when you walk in, there was like a wall of pastries, right? And you like self-serve pastry section. I was just walking past trying to get to the sandwich section, which depends on the store, is either right at the end or right at the beginning. Usually in supermarkets, it's a bit of an odd setup. But I was walking past the pastries, and I heard just bizarrely, I couldn't quite believe it. I just heard, "Yeah, do the poo-poo, do the poo-poo." I was like, "What? Do the poo-poo?" So I turned like you would hearing such a thing in a supermarket, and there was about a 2-year-old sat on a potty inside the supermarket next to the pastries doing a poo, right? It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life. No one else seemed to care about this incident, even though like literally like the potty was probably less than an arm away from an open display of pastries, croissants, pecan swirls, whatever. I mean, all of it was there, right? I was not buying any pastries that day. Straight, and I was like, should I tell someone this is happening? Like, literally, a child is pooing next to the pastries. No one cared at all. It was the most bizarre thing ever. But anyway, my choice is Test Drive Unlimited.
Got it.
Right.
Beautiful, artful segue there.
The thing about him, his segues, that they make me feel really good about my preamble, because I always feel very long before I get to my game, and I just listen to Tom and be like, "Oh, we drove around on pastries and some poo-poo. Anyway, here's something completely different."
Can I just clarify the link between the pooing child and Test Drive Unlimited?
It was on the road trip. It was on the road trip.
Right, I see. Okay, yeah, sorry, I forgot about that.
That was just a moment along the road trip, right? And Test Drive Unlimited is a bit like that. Yeah. Like, I know people are going to say it's a racing game. There are races in it. You race, etc. And that is part of it. But Test Drive Unlimited is not a good racing game. The driving model actually is a bit shit. It didn't play that well, actually. But it somehow didn't matter, because at the time, 360 era, like now, open world racing games, like it's like, yeah, it's another one. Like we've had that for Horizons. We've had other games. We just had the Crew, Motorfest, etc. Open world racing games are a thing. You expect them all to be sort of like fine, right? There's loads of stuff to explore. They're massive. But back then, this was like a kind of, it felt almost like like something we hadn't had before. We had stuff like, it was
kind of the
similar,
vanguard of all that.
But it felt like, and they sold it on like this lifestyle. Like you were not just a race, you had a lifestyle. You could buy houses, you could get expensive cars, and I bought into that stuff somewhat. And even though I didn't like racing in it, I spent a long time just driving around. Where was it set? Yeah. Somewhere in Hawaii. Is it Hawaii?
Yeah, Oahu.
Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah. Well, it's got the same setting as the Crew Motorfest.
I was just going to say,
really,
everything is full circle. Yeah.
So,
so that game came out in the like early era of sort of Xbox 360, Xbox Live, and there was actually a demo. There was like a free demo of that game, which included all the kind of connected features and online, stuff that populated that island with a bunch of other people playing the game. And that was the really, really cool thing about it. And as you say, it was kind of rubbish as a racing game. The handling model wasn't brilliant. But the two things it did really, really well was impromptu road trips. So if you were like cutting about with your mates. You could just be like, oh, I'll set a waypoint over there on the other side of the island and we'll drive over there. And you just kind of cruise through and you'd be kind of weaving through traffic, not really racing, but just, kind of hanging out together. The other thing it did really, really well was the sense of like ownership of the vehicle. So it was one of the earliest video games to allow you to kind of walk around the car, open the doors, like beep the horn, all that kind of nonsense, basically. So that sense of, you'd buy a house and then you'd pick cars that were sort of meaningful to you, and you'd feel like you owned them, and you pick which one you were going to take out to drive with your mates. So that sort of set a kind of precedent for that open world racing game that I think series like Forza Horizon have benefited and built upon since. What's interesting is that the guys who made Test Drive Unlimited were Eden. That Eden Studios was the name of that development studio. They are now known as Ivory Tower, and they are the folks who make the Crew games. So as you say, it's come full circle. The Crew Motorfest is set in the same location that Test Drive Unlimited was back in the day. It's
quite mad that the Crew Motorfest obviously got a lot of heat when it was first unveiled for basically being like, well, this is just Forza Horizon, what you doing? It's even got a very dubiously funded festival that's taken over an entire country.
We're on social media.
Yeah. but actually it's probably like Test Drive Unlimited 3 in a way. So
I think basically what Mike is saying there is I've done a really good choice. Sounded like he was vouching for it, and probably I think this has backfired, Jim, a little bit in that you're going to struggle not to pick that now, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I love Test Drive Unlimited. I genuinely love it. So I've been playing it to compare it to the Crew Motorfest actually, and. Yeah, so this is very difficult for me now. Curse you, Tom. Right, okay. Mike, what is the best driving, not racing game as far as you're concerned?
Now, this is going to make Tom look amazing because the one I picked is actually another spiritual sequel to Test Drive Unlimited, which is the original The Crew. Now, my caveats here are it's not a brilliant game, but it's a really interesting game. And the stuff it is really good at is that stuff we were talking about, that sense of road trip. Mainly because they, expanded from a small island, not even all of the islands of Hawaii, to the entire continental US. Is sort of built in this amazing, compressed style. Where you have a real sense of all the different areas. So if you're up in New England, it's that kind of autumnal, orange leaves, the fall, that stuff. But then you'll drive down the coast and sort of slowly, imperceptibly, it will change and evolve and turn into this sort of sun-cracked asphalt of Florida and palm trees and things like that. And then maybe you'll head west then and you'll end up in the bayou with near Louisiana and stuff like that. And then all of the major cities are sort of expanded enough that they feel like meaningful spaces as well. So although the entire thing's compressed, you don't just get one or two streets of New York. You get a meaningfully sized version of New York and a meaningfully sized version of Los Angeles and Las Vegas and all that kind of stuff. And I just think in terms of atmosphere and in terms of enabling those sorts of road trips with your mates in that kind of always connected environment, that is the pinnacle, I think, of what they managed. The Crew 2, arguably a better game, more structured game, better handling, things like that. But actually, I think it lost a bit in so far as it had sort of it had seasonal weather changes and stuff, and I think you lost that sense of heading into Colorado and all of a sudden everything's snowy, and there was a sense of a real transition. It felt a bit more sort of I don't know, canned and pre-authored, but in a way that felt sort of cinematic and kind of Hollywood. You'd have these moments where you're drifting through a sort of great redwood forest through the mist, or you're coming down the mountain and in the middle of the night, and then you see sort of Vegas all lit up and sort of rising up to meet you. And it had all those kind of really atmospheric moments that great road trips are made of. Those memories you make where, it just so happens you're in the car and the sun's setting and the sky looks incredible and you've got the sea to one side and mountains to the other, all that kind of stuff. The Crew does brilliantly. And the reason I described it as the platonic ideal of a driving game, not a racing game, is the racing is shit garbage. It's so bad. It's got all these.
It's terrible.
It's got all these weird like MMO mechanics and like awful rubber banding to the point where like if your car isn't spec'd up to the correct spec for that race because you haven't done enough grinding, it's nearly impossible to win because they'll just drive away from you. It's so broken and busted like as a sort of like racing game that the only thing you can do is hang out with your mates on this incredible, like one of gaming's greatest open world maps of all time. And I do think I've been playing a bit of the Crew Motorfest, and I think it does a really good job of being Forza Horizon, but I don't think it does a great job of being the Crew, if that makes sense. And actually, I think that sense of scale is a really key thing about that made the Crew like brilliant fun. And I think it's lost a bit going back down to a more sort of compact game map. I'd love them to have tackled like mainland Europe, for example, or something of a similar scale with a similar sense of variety and evolution as you sort of travel around. But yeah, it's a rubbish racing game. It's got an awful storyline as well. Like,
my god,
the main
you
character,
take that back.
The main character, an undercover cop who like looks like the most undercover cop you've ever seen.
I think voiced by Troy Baker.
Voiced by Troy Baker, indeed.
Yes.
He looks too. I think it's because it's a French development team, and they're like, "What does a street race look like?" Well, stylish, obviously. Like, can you imagine this guy pulling up to a McDonald's car park at the start of a street race, and they're like, "Who's this urbane motherfucker?" Like, you know, they're all wearing tracky bottoms and prison white sneakers, probably. Like,
but you were infiltrating a gang, the hierarchy of which was on V engines. So I think the top was a V6 or a V8. I think that's fucking. I
will allow that. Yeah, that was great.
That was super dumb and amazing. And I don't think because like if you're a racing gang, it's just not going to be like some on Toretto. No, I'm the V6. It's like oh no, you say that and you know immediately where he stands in the hierarchy of the gang. That was super dumb.
But yeah, it was ridiculous, and I really like that game, and I'm a bit of an apologist for it, mainly because of most of the mechanics can go in the bin, but that map, bunch of friends, grab your car that you've sort of built up and kind of cultivated because you can't afford to buy any of the other cars because they're all microtransactioned out the wazoo, but like that sense of just rolling around and driving between cities, it went from that Test Drive Unlimited thing of like, I'll set a waypoint on the other side of the island and we'll drive there, to, all right, let's go coast to coast. Or, let's drive from like, all the way up in Seattle, all the way down to like San Diego or whatever. So I just think in terms of that, like racing, not driving, if you're being that like specific about it, I think the Crew is probably the game.
Yeah, I mean,
I quite like the Crew as well. Sadly, to be like agreeing with Mike, I think I played the Crew for 80 hours or something, probably.
Yeah,
has some of the like it does have some of the worst racing. Like I remember it had like some endurance races that were just like the worst thing I'd ever played in my life. I got to the point where I was like just doing like end game stuff, and I was like maximum level, and I was just like
3 hour long.
I'm going to do these annoying, horrible long races, and I just at that point I just gave up. But when I wasn't doing that, it was surprisingly fun, and for a while it was all I played in my spare time. The Crew, which I like, it had something about it that was just a bit different. But yeah, it basically is like evolved from Test Drive. So I think that's
we're both right, is what you're saying.
I mean, I think there's someone that's wrong for sure on this podcast, and two people that have had like good choices.
Wow. Well, I've got to pick something now.
My memory of the Crew one, the sense of they had honestly they were the first ones to use the term car PG in the pre-release, and that's probably central to what made the racing really bad in that game, because you had to it was a numbers game. It was just like stats in a car, and it never felt good. They have never completely abandoned that in 2 and Motorfest, but I feel like they have a different approach to it. But my memory of that game is this was the era of Ubisoft putting towers and everything, and so they had to have towers in the Crew to reveal parts of the map, and so you would just drive to the tower.
I remember
that was it. And I was
I remember that coming in
you didn't
Video
need to
Gamer.
do this.
Yeah, when me and Tom were at Video Gamer, the crew came in, and I remember we had been joking for a while about how, like, well, the crew's obviously going to have towers where you unlock bits of the map, and other people were like, yeah, look, it's not like that sort of game, is it? That's daft. And then we booted it up, and that's the first thing it gets you to do is unlock a bit of the map. And it was just like, guys, who is the exec at Ubisoft who's like, you gotta have towers, like, so yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, it's a great game if you don't do any of the game stuff, basically.
Correct.
Right, okay, it's an idea of
yeah. All right, okay, I've got to pick something now. Turns out you do actually give way to the right. Okay, so I've got to pick something out of two really good choices for this topic. Sharif, I can't believe this. Right, Onrush sounds great the way you describe it, right? But the way everyone else describes it, it doesn't. So,
I think they struggled with selling it. I feel like they just did. I don't want to say they didn't know what they had, because they clearly did. But it's one of those things where, how do you sell this to people? I feel like they should have leaned a little bit harder
they
into
should have
this.
just fucking said what you said, because I was really pumped. Until Mike came in and destroyed it.
This is a driving game, or they could have just said something, say like, this is a racing game without the racing. Or like had like tried to lean in. I don't know how much they could play with like the name Call of Duty, given that it's a different company. But I feel like they could have, because it evokes so many so many similar feelings from like a competitive match in a Call of Duty, just on wheels and fast. And yeah, as Mike said, it can be exhausting because it's always on like at 11. But that's what I liked about it, and how original that idea was. Because people like, I really like just like genre melding in games.
You're just too extreme a guy, Sharif. I think for this.
I live life in the fast lane, Jim.
Yeah,
always.
Yeah, exactly. This guy's got a turbocharger.
Fast lane.
Okay, so basically, right? Apologies, Sharif, but now the choice is basically between what is a better game, Test Drive Unlimited or the original The Crew. And I'm
you could have that be a different episode. That's not the title of this episode. I will contest that.
I'm genuinely torn between those two choices, because as demonstrated, I love Test Drive Unlimited. But
it's a racing game.
It's a racing game, but like
why are you collecting cars in it?
The thing about Test Drive Unlimited is the life sim stuff and just and cutting about is just as it's the most interesting thing, and it's really witty. Test Drive Unlimited as well, and it's got that intro where you arrive at Honolulu Airport and you kind of pick your character from a lineup of people who've just got off the plane. It's a little bit similar to the Crew Motorfest intro, actually, except in that you're picking from a lineup of like influencer sort of Instagram tossers.
Yeah, okay.
But in Test Drive Unlimited, it's like a group of people who are checking in at the airport at immigration, and everyone you don't pick fumbles and can't find their passport as your character sort of swans through the gate. And it's just really like it's got a wit about it that certainly the Crew games don't really have. Right?
Not intentionally, at least.
No.
This is going to sound like I'm making a case for Tom, but one of the first missions you get in Test Drive Unlimited, you get given the keys to a Ferrari Enzo, which is like one of the fastest cars in the game. But you're told that every time you crash it, like you're going to lose a bunch of money from the delivery fee. So one of the first things you end up doing in Test Drive Unlimited is driving a Ferrari Enzo extremely slowly, obeying all of the traffic signals. And if there is nothing more driving, not racing than that, I think probably.
Yeah. It's a brilliant driving game, basically. So I'm torn. I think The Crew is a fantastic like driving game. And me in a previous life when me and Tom worked at Video Gamer, we did a video called The Crew Gameplay 1080p, and it was everyone who worked at the website sitting on a couch pretending to have a road trip across the US, which demonstrates what you were saying, Mike. It was like, and it was a great video, and like at one point we stopped to get ice cream, and it was just like,
What a look at that video.
It was wonderful. Sadly, I don't think it exists anymore because the people who currently own it deleted it for some reason, for themselves. But it was we drove from Manhattan. We drove from Times Square to LA to the conference center where E3 happens, it was great, and I've got really fond memories of that trip. And it takes like 45 minutes to an hour, I think, to drive across that map.
Yeah.
The map is enormous. So like I've genuinely had a really great road trip experience with that game without leaving a single room. So
most of the iconic road trips, like most of the iconic Hollywood road trips, at least, are on the continental US. So you can do Highway 1 up the
Has
West
it got
Coast,
Route 66?
Exactly. Yeah. It's got Route 66. It's got the kind of, if you did the Times Square to LA, that's basically like the old Cannonball Run that they used to do across the country. From sea to shining sea. So yeah, it all those kind of like Hollywood memories of road trips can be sort of recreated with your mates.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's brilliant. Right, I think I'm gonna give it to Mike, Tom.
Yes.
But Tom's going to be raging because he's like, every time we've got a guest, you give it to them. But you know, I think Mike has genuinely earned it this time. Wouldn't you agree, Tom?
Was that because Mike spoke last? I think you're just so easily swayed. It's like the last person to speak mentioned the game that won. I wonder how that happened.
Yeah, but I also gave you an absolute gimme with that Ferrari Enzo thing, and you still didn't win. So.
That's because if you'd finished with that, a different outcome, right, Jim?
I just want to say, like, both of these are still racing games at their core. Like, at some point, you're gonna get into a race.
Unbelievable. I mean, I'm genuinely surprised actually, Mike, as well, because I thought you were going to go for Outrun 2.
I mean, Outrun 2 is brilliant. I probably should have done, but I thought I'd pick the thing is,
still racing games though.
It's not. It's a driving game.
But no, it's not. What are you doing? Are you just driving around? You can just do that. You can do that in any game. Though I could just load up Forza Horizon 4 and go around the tiny bit of Scotland they have there. I don't care. That's not a racing game then. No.
Yeah, but actually, Forza Horizon 4 is one of the worst driving games because it makes you drive in Edinburgh, which is one of the worst experiences.
I love it because I love driving around the UK in that game. I should have picked that if that's the thing. You talked a little bit about like the open fields of the UK and like all these. You
definitely wouldn't have won because I have a personal vendetta against the city of Edinburgh. Right. Okay. So Mike Channels won, and will forever have a point in our leaderboard. One single point. Thank you very much for listening. Please leave us a 5-star review on our podcast platform of choice, even though we generally don't deserve it. I think we've got a really worthy winner this time, despite all the as opposed to all the other times where I've just picked something crap to annoy Tom. So you know, I think it's worked out really well. Mike, where can we find you, as if people watching don't already know?
I am available on youtube.com/outside Xbox.
Yeah.
And occasionally on Outside Extra as well.
Yeah. And also Ox Venture, which...
Yes, if you like tabletop stuff, that's where we are doing all of that.
It's a really, really, really complicated guy. You know, on the one hand, you like going really fast, and on the other hand, you like playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is the slowest fucking thing on the planet.
Yeah, Jim,
it's about balance.
I contain multitudes. So.
It's about balance, you know.
All right, okay. Thanks very much, everyone. I'll speak to you later.
Later.
Let's all do a wave.
Bye.
Bye.